Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad, back with you for another video. As many of you will know, I did a series of videos from Ireland when I was in Ireland about a number of topics. You can obviously find that on the rest of my channel. And I had some requests for a sort of an epilogue to those videos. Something, now that I've been back in London for a couple of weeks. Is it even a couple of weeks? A week and a half? But enough time now to sort of be able to reflect on it and think about it and figure out that from the position of sitting here in my office in London, what did I really learn, or what do I now think about Ireland, Irish politics, and particularly Irish politics in relation to British politics. And so this is what I've come up with, which is basically why I actually think that Britain should pay a lot more attention to Ireland and Irish politics. I mean, for a start, it should pay more attention to Ireland because it is an island fairly close to it, just off its, really, when you think about it, just off its west coast. And yet the amount of attention that Ireland or Irish politics get in Britain is insanely low. I mean, every Irish person I've ever worked with, known in London, it's one of the things they'll always say is that they are just shocked about how little unless they dig into it. Yeah, and it's easier now, obviously, with the internet. If I go back 25 years where the internet wasn't quite what it is now, a lot of Irish people would say, oh, geez, I felt completely cut off from Ireland, really, other than when I would call home and speak to friends and family, because you don't hear anything about Ireland, really. It's like it just doesn't exist. It's like someone put it brilliantly at one point. I can't remember who. This isn't my original thought, is what I'm trying to say. Someone has said this, and I'm repeating it, but I just can't attribute it because I can't remember who it was. But that essentially, if you had shown up in Britain for the first time and you didn't know anything about geography, you would think that Britain was an island about 40 miles off the coast of America, and that Ireland didn't exist. And that is sort of true. If you look at British media, it's amazing how kind of US obsessed it is in a way. And really obsessed with US politics and not very interested in continental politics particularly. But having said that, people can get very into things like whether Le Pen will win in France, what's going on with the AfD in Germany. So there's some bits of stuff that you will get in mainstream media about French or German politics or even Dutch politics sometimes. And on a really rare occasion, something about a Nordic country. But you never ever hear about Ireland. It's incredible how little it is discussed in Britain. So I think that that's just weird and culturally odd. So yeah, I just find that weird really now that I think about it. But I think there's a lot more that I think Britain could learn from Ireland, and I think actually particularly people who are really into British politics I think should really look at Irish politics a lot, because I think there's probably a lot more we could get out of it, given. And I know this is going to be controversial and people are going to go, whoa, about this, but I think it's just true. I think Britain and Ireland are culturally more similar than Britain is to probably any other country. And particularly America. I think there's this fantasy in Britain for some people. Some people are not on this planet, or would really disagree with this idea. But I think there is a tranche of thinking in Britain that Britain is a lot like America, or that Britain and America share a sort of common cultural bond, which I just frankly think is bullshit. I've never experienced. I think Britain is so vastly different from America. It's incredible. I hadn't been to America in 15 years before last summer, and I went back, and it shocks you, really. You forget how different it is from Britain, just how completely different it is. Where, yeah, Ireland's different from Britain. I'm not saying they're the same country or there's no cultural differences. Of course there are. There's plenty, but I think that there is a basis of like how people live and what they're interested in and what their values are that I think is closer between Irish and British people than any other group of people in terms of who, I'm sure there's many people in Ireland that say, well, we feel much closer to America than we do to the Brits. And there'll be loads of historical reasons for that, obviously. The whole history of the United Kingdom before Ireland departed, for instance. Many things that happened in the 19th century that we don't need to go into. So that I get. And there would be a want to be closer to America, where there's a lot of Irish immigrants, and it's a republic. I get all that. But Ireland and America are very different. And so anyway, I've said my piece about that. I think Britain and Ireland. I think Britain could learn a lot from Ireland simply because some of the lessons from it are things that could be taken into British politics. And I think that's very true because one of the things I often talk about in British politics, and actually one of the things is I get pushback from so many people about so much that I talk about in British politics, but no one ever really pushes back on this, which is interesting to me. Even people whose argument really depends on this being not true, is Britain is generally a very badly governed country. It has been from a really long time. I don't know when we can go back and say it was well governed. I mean, maybe it's the Second World War. I don't, like, seriously. I'm not kidding. We tend to venerate or talk, at least if we're not venerating, we're talking a lot about people like Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. And I know you're going to say loads of people hate those particular prime ministers, but we're still talking about them. They're still so relevant to the political conversation in a way that, say, David Cameron or James Callaghan simply isn't. And I think that's just because they were so rare in the sense that they had a real vision of what they wanted to do, and they were managed to execute so much of it. That's very rare in British politics. I mean, people are really having a go at Starmer and saying he's the worst prime minister we've ever had, and he's so awful. He's just a very average British prime minister, which means he's kind of a bureaucrat who spanners about, doesn't really know what he wants to do, and everything kind of falls apart and isn't very good and nothing gets better. I mean, that's the status quo in Britain. That's generally what you get. And in fact, you're sort of lucky when you get someone like that in a weird, perverse way, because at least it isn't someone who's over-promising and vastly under-delivering or doing something really crazy or ideologically insane or whatever. So yeah, I think Britain's badly governed. And actually, I think Ireland, and people will disagree with this as well, and you can come at me in the comments for this, and I'm saying this as an observer and someone who has never lived in Ireland, but Ireland to me, compared to Britain, seems much better governed as a general rule. I think change is easier to happen. Things just happen, I feel, in a quicker, more thought-out way. And I wonder if it's the way that the system, the electoral system. So, as I'm sure everyone Irish will know this, but anyone else who doesn't know this, Ireland for the Dáil, which is basically the House of Commons, it's the equivalent, is the lower house that essentially passes legislation, is it's under a PR system, a proportional representation system, called the single transferable vote, which, just for the record, the real PR nuts in Britain, that's their dream, is STV, right? There's loads of different proportional systems you can have. You can have mixed systems as well, where you basically have a constituency with a list top up. You can have open lists, you can have closed lists, you can have all this sort of stuff. Real PR nuts love STV. It's their dream. They think it's the most perfect electoral system ever devised. I could go into why, but let's not. Let's just take that as part of this discussion. Do I think it's the best system ever devised? Not particularly. I don't dislike STV. I don't love it. I'm very agnostic about electoral reform. As some of you may or may not know, I worked on the AV referendum in 2010, 2011. I worked for the Electoral Reform Society for many years. So I have worked in the sector, if you like, the electoral reform sector in Britain. And I kind of came away with, you know what, there's some good things about first past the post. It's not ideal. But also, I am also not someone who thinks first past the post is absolutely necessary to democracy. And if we switch to a PR system, it would be chaos and it would be awful. I don't think that either. I think that first past the post and PR systems have their own pluses and minuses, basically. But I think possibly for the first time ever in Britain, that the sort of push towards a PR system, some sort of PR system, certainly I won't be STV. I'm sorry to break it to all the electoral dreamers out there. I can't see that. I mean, I think the best we would ever get, best from a PR perspective, from a pro-PR perspective, is some sort of mixed system. You know, something where we kept some sort of constituency thing, but with a top-up list. The list would probably be closed, which isn't ideal, actually, if I'm being honest. But I think there probably is some momentum towards that, given the fracturing of British politics. And the idea of people going, well, you know, we've in 2024 we had a general election under first past the post where, you know, Labour got a huge majority, like a massive majority, 180 or whatever the hell it was, on 33% of the vote, 33, 34, somewhere between those. You know, that's not a great advertisement for first past the post, is it? Like, it's just really not. And we might see Reform get in at the next election on much less than that. We might see Reform get in, have a huge majority, a similar majority possibly that Labour has got now, on 29% of the vote, so less than 30. At which point some of the arguments for first past the post really start to fall apart, I think, for people, and you begin to have just more cogent and arguments for PR that will actually be heard by the average person who doesn't spend all their time thinking about this. One thing to say about Ireland as well, possibly part of it being a result of the system that they have. Irish politics has been dominated, and really, even though the grip is lessening to some extent, still pretty much is when you look at the composition of the current Dáil. Is you've got two main parties, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and what distinguishes them, why they exist in the first place, is because of different positions they took on Irish independence, the settlement of Ireland. They were both, I'm not saying neither, all of them were pro-independence, but the point being is that there was essentially a treaty that was signed in 22. I don't want to get this wrong, so don't come at me. Maybe it was 21. 22, I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was 22. Which essentially said that Ireland would govern itself, but it would be part of the Commonwealth. So it would be a lot like Canada, right? They're making all their executive decisions themselves, but essentially the king or queen of Britain is still acting as the head of state, right? So you probably would have had a governor general. I don't know if Ireland had a governor general. Sorry for my ignorance on that, because that's what Canada has, a governor general, who acts as the monarch's representative. Again, it's all figurehead stuff, right? Like, they don't have any decision-making process. It's not like the king can come into Canada and say, sorry, you're not doing this. It's just, yeah, it's a way of staying part of the Commonwealth. Anyway, Fianna Fáil were the anti-treaty people who wanted Ireland to be a republic unto itself, and didn't want to be part of the Commonwealth. And so they were the main parties. And essentially, what's interesting about them is they're both centre-rightish, but very, very on the centre of centre-right, right? And that's, as a centrist, that is absolutely fascinating to me, and it always has been. This kind of idea that politics can be dominated by two different, kind of essentially liberal-conservative. I mean, I know... it's one of them. It's the thing. I'm trying to remember which of them is supposedly more pro market. I think it's Fine Gael, but the thing is, I could have got that wrong. It could be Fianna Fáil. One of them is a slightly more pro market, but it's kind of much of a muchness. You know, they very much push that markets are good, but it's good to have an active state that you know, regulates things, etc. Very, very centrist stuff. And I've always said that's great. I think that's amazing. I wish we had that in Britain. And actually, in Britain, it's becoming more and more and more extreme. And by the way, this is happening in Ireland. I'm not saying it's not happening in Ireland. You know, Sinn Féin's getting more popularity, partly as like it's coalescing a lot more of the left-wing vote. There's more of a left-wing vote that's getting annoyed. It's younger, getting annoyed with the status quo, wants to change things, wants worldwide socialism, whatever the hell they want this week. And then you actually have some far right. But the thing is, what's interesting about Ireland is actually the far right's pretty it's quite small and really quite sort of dispersed and not very organized. It certainly doesn't have a figurehead. I mean, I hesitate to call Nigel Farage far right, but it doesn't even have someone like that who's a populist right figure. And it certainly doesn't have anyone like Tommy Robinson. There's no Irish equivalents of those people, like, at all. Never mind, like, we've got Rupert Lowe and you've got the Ben Habib thing with Musk and all that. Like, there's nothing like that in Irish politics. And I think partially it's part of the system. And actually part of it is that the Irish economy is doing pretty well. Kind of goes back to some of the things I said in my other videos. When the economy is going well, people are less pissed off. People are less annoyed. You know, people are feel less aggrieved and feel less the need to have radical change. You know, that's my sense in Ireland, is there a sense of radical change? I mean, I think the radical change that people are thinking about is unity, you know, Northern Ireland becoming part of the Republic, and a sort of fear about what it might mean, and will it be good for the Republic of Ireland? You know, it's, to some extent, the uniting of Ireland is sort of a, it's an emotional thing. You know, it's a heartfelt thing. It's a stirring deep within, if you're a sort of Irish nationalist. When you have to start thinking about it practically, it gets a little, you know, a little scarier. But I've covered that on a whole video, so you can go watch that video if you want, about why United Ireland might be coming and what it means. So I think the other thing, so that's really interesting. And then British politics, I think particularly centrists, right, could look at what Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil do in much more detail. I think we should have way more detail on that feeds into the British system. And, you know, you go to like these things, you go to meetings, and I get called into them sometimes as a sort of somewhat a centrist on the scene, I guess you might say. And it's always the same old dreck. And certainly no one talks about Ireland. That's for sure. Even though, you know, just across the Irish Sea, you know, a sort of few hours boat ride away, you have a republic where two centre-rightish parties have dominated politics for like a century. It just seems like, well, maybe you guys should think about that a little. And pro-Europeans as well. Pro-Europeans never talk about Ireland, other than in a sort of abstract way, which is about Northern Ireland and the border and the customs union, and it's still very British-centric. You know, it's really not about like, hey, what's Ireland getting out of being in the EU? It's not really talked about that much. Again, because Ireland pretty much isn't. I think the other thing that we could learn that's interesting that could be coming, I think, is how much of Irish politics is a portent of what might be coming in British politics. So a good example would be, at the moment, you've got a grand coalition in Ireland. So Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have formed a government together, where the leader of Fine Gael, Simon Harris, he was the Taoiseach for 2 years. And then Martin, who's the Fianna Fáil chap, he is now the Taoiseach and will be until the next general election. Could we see a grand coalition between Labour and Tories at some point? I think to a lot of people it sounds a bit ridiculous, but it's amazing to me how much the sort of Labour right, if you like, and the Tory left have slowly been coming together. I mean, I think they've always had stuff in common, but the point is, now with so much pushing to the extremes, you know, with Advance UK and all that stuff, and then you've got, you know, Zach Polanski and the Greens, and politics just going like that. How much, like, it could be a point where Labour and the Conservative parties goes, you know what, the only way we can govern the country in any sort of meaningful way ever again is grand coalition. I don't think it's out of the question. I don't think it's the weirdest thing I've ever thought of. And again, where are the lessons? Well, just across the Irish Sea, about how you do that and how that might work. Right, I'll end it there. I think there's a lot more I could talk about, but I don't want this video to get boring. And I like to keep these to about 20 minutes or less, because I think that seems to be the optimum kind of time in terms of getting the audience to watch. If you've liked this video, if you've got to this bit, I sort of assume that you have liked something about it. Please like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. Subscribing to the channel is really great because it really, really helps me. And leave me a note. As I say, I got a lot of messages about, could you have an epilogue on Ireland? And I kind of didn't know what to say, and I didn't want to make a video just for the hell of it. But then I started thinking about, you know, the Grand Coalition stuff and how centrists operate in Ireland and the way it's governed and PR. And soon I was like, okay, I've got enough for a video, and I think I'll do it. So hope you've enjoyed, and please watch the other videos if you haven't. There's plenty. You'll see them on the channel. And I'll be back to you next time I have something to say. All right. Cheers, guys.